Hey, Gabe.
Hey, what's up, Tim?
In the movie Spies Like Us, Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase are two government bureaucrats that fumble their way into a secret plot by the intelligence services and rogue military officials to usurp presidential decision-making on nuclear weapons and national security. Is this the dreaded deep state that we've been warned about?
Tim, I think you're being super critical.
Welcome to another episode of the Super Critical Podcast, where we delve into the fun and oftentimes nonsensical way pop culture portrays nuclear weapons. My name is Tim Westmyer, someone who studies nuclear weapons and works on nuclear nonproliferation and counterproliferation for a living. I'm joined today in the podcast studio / our respective basements over Zoom with my co-host Gabe. Gabe, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tim, how's it going?
Pretty good. What do you do? Why are you on this podcast?
I don't know. I have this friend who, likes to make me watch low quality movies that involve super technical things about nuclear weapons, and I guess I hate myself, so I just go along with it.
I'm glad I was able to find this special soul to share this with. I appreciate this and your patience.
You definitely found a doozy for this one.
Well, this doozy is the 1985 comedy Spies Like Us, which IMDb.com describes as two bumbling government employees think that they are U.S. spies, only to discover that they are actually decoys for nuclear war. Have you heard of this movie before I asked you to watch it for the podcast?
I'd heard of the title. I don't know if I could say I was intimately familiar with the details. This was kind of from that catalog. So this was the same year I was born. I think you might have been born 1985 also?
1 year before, yeah.
1 year before. So, it's like that kind of before I was obviously aware, and I've missed a lot of the movies from this era, so I'm glad to kind of be working through the 80s catalog, although I don't know if this is the one that I'd recommend people start on.
Well, I saw it in college, and I remember liking it in college. We'll talk about the ratings at the end, and I think you've already kind of tipped your hand to what you feel about it, but I did remember liking it a lot more in college, and I did remember that it had a zany nuke plot, especially near the end. So, of course. This is why it gets on this podcast.
Yeah. I was surprised because directed by John Landis, who has some pretty heavy credits to his name, right?
Yeah, Blues Brothers, Animal House. He even directed the Michael Jackson Thriller music video. So he's pretty good, and it's got a great cast, right? We've got Dan Aykroyd, we've got Chevy Chase, a bunch of cameos from kind of big name people, including Bob Hope. The reason why he's in this is because this movie is an homage to a series of 7 different road adventure movies that Bob Hope did with Bing Crosby. I guess they were called the Road 2 series. They took their talents to places like Singapore, Bali, Hong Kong, Zanzibar, and Alaska, and a couple other places like that.
Were those also kind of were they playing kind of spies or no?
No, I think one of them was like a smart huckster guy, and one was kind of more of a straight comedy person. It wasn't a one-to-one characteristic type thing for Spies Like Us. I don't think any of them had nuke plots either.
Okay, gotcha. Well, for this one at least, so you said Dan Aykroyd, he plays Austin Milbarge, who's this like brilliant, tinker, analyst, code breaker, jack of all trades who works in the basement of the Pentagon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Chevy Chase, Emmett Fitzhume, who's kind of his partner for this. He's more of like the playboy. He works in the State Department PR team, and he wants to be a spy, but he's kind of a slacker and thinks he can just coast on his family's connection to the intelligence business.
Right, and his ability to seduce his supervisor
Right.
and just kind of bribe his way through things. Doesn't really work out that all well for him. This was written by Aykroyd as well as his partner Dave Thomas. Dave Thomas is great. He's from SCTV.
Also makes good hamburgers.
Yeah. And Paul McCartney from the Beatles. He did the music video for the movie. Not necessarily his best work, but there's a lot of really quality people attached to this.
Yeah, I'm surprised because usually this thing is garbage in, garbage out, but they actually had some good stuff to work with here. So
it's an interesting mix here. The movie made quite a bit of money. It made over $77 million on a $22 million budget, which is certainly pretty good for a comedy. Critics didn't like it so much. Rotten Tomatoes still gives it a 32% fresh rating. The summary of Rotten Tomatoes is, despite the comedy prowess of its director and 2 leads, Spies Like Us appears to disavow all knowledge of how to make this viewer laugh. Ouch.
That's a sick burn right there.
Yep, let's get into it. There's two main questions that I was thinking that we should talk about over the course of this episode. One, the movie plot involves a road mobile intercontinental ballistic missile launcher. So let's talk a little bit about why did Russia build these things while the United States decided to play with a different set of toys? And two, how did this movie capture the high-stakes Cold War intrigue between two nuclear-armed superpowers when you have, basically two characters here bumbling their way through a spy crisis? So let's see how well it kind of captures some of those topics. So let's run through the plot of this movie. And as usual, spoiler warning, if you haven't seen this movie from 1985, if you're like Gabe and maybe you were born in that year, it is available for streaming on like Amazon Prime. I don't know where you picked it up, Gabe. Sometimes it's on Netflix, but it wasn't on there right now.
I rented it on Amazon Prime for $3, so that's $3 I'm never getting back. But I do it for you, Tim.
I'll Venmo you. It's a tax write-off for me, so.
Nice.
This is Emmett Fitzhume. He's an information officer at State. Started there in '74 as a mail boy. His father got him his job. This is Austin Milbarge. He's a repair supervisor in DIA's code-breaking arm at the Pentagon. He's good with hardware. He's got some Russian.
They're the best men we have.
Two teams. One to do the job, the other to be a diversion.
You mean decoys?
Exactly.
We've got a very special assignment for you two.
Foreign service.
Yes.
Undercover work?
Yes.
Emmett Fitzhume. Austin Milbarge. When do we begin our training?
Right away.
Pakistan?
We're Americans!
Cut the sucker.
Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Will you marry me? Chevy Chase.
Dan Aykroyd.
So we open the movie on an ominous shot of something huge barreling through a wooded landscape, knocking over trees. What could this possibly be, Gabe?
A giant?
No.
A dinosaur?
Nope.
Well, what is it?
It is a Soviet road mobile nuclear missile that is traveling nose cone first through the forest. Doesn't exactly seem safe, but, it's ominous, right?
Right, but they couldn't put the no trees were harmed during the making of this film.
Oh no, several trees were completely destroyed, much of the rainforest. So this movie calls this thing the SS-50, Road Mobile Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, ICBM. It's a launching system, and it appears to be some sort of new deployment by the Soviet Union.
So I've been watching movies now with you for a while, so whenever I hear jargon terms or titles of weapons, I always think, is this real or is this fake? So go ahead, Tim. Is this a real weapon or fake weapon name?
So there is no exact system called the SS-50, but the movie came out in 1985.
Okay.
And the SS-25 weapon system, a Soviet mobile missile launcher, the first of its kind to launch these kind of long-range ICBMs, things that can hit from Russia, hit the United States. These started their service life also in 1985. So pretty good timing on the part of the movie. Now, the development of this system started in 1977, but there were news reports because they started to do flight tests and things in 1983. So the movie clearly was watching the news. Dave Thomas and Dan Aykroyd, when they were writing this, they picked up on this, and they timed their movie pretty well.
Gotcha.
So the nickname for the SS-25, NATO always used to give a name for their weapon systems. The SS-25 was nicknamed the Sickle by the US and NATO. Now, the SS-50 in the movie does not seem to have a nickname. Do you got one for us, Gabe? What do you want to call it?
We can stick with the yard tool genre, so maybe like Weed Whacker or something like that.
Not hammer? Not hammer and sickle?
No, yeah, well, maybe. I like the yard, the landscaping vibe going on there.
Well, it does knock over trees with a vengeance, so
you go.
I like it.
There
I like
you
Weed
go.
Whacker.
Exactly.
So we'll talk more in the episode about the Russian road mobile ICBM system and why the Soviet Union built so many of them and the US decided not to, but we'll talk about that a little bit later near the end of the episode. Fortunately for the US, there's a US spy satellite that's taking these amazing photos in space of the SS-50, and these photos are beamed down to some kind of random warehouse disguised as the Ace Tomato Company in Washington, D.C. This kind of looked like it was over by like the Main Street Fish Market, right?
Actually, it was at Union Market. Yeah, for those in the DC area, this is now, it's being gentrified, and there's this big, hipster market there. But it was like all the food wholesalers, and so it's actually kind of cool. This actually caught my attention. My wife and I go to Union Market every now and then for food. It caught my attention. Like back in the day, this was actually a place for like real working restaurant industry people instead of upper middle class millennials like ourselves.
It also has a good drive-in movie theater that they put up on the wall. My wife and I saw Good Will Hunting.
Oh, nice.
Not this movie, unfortunately. And apparently it's also a place for spies hang out in these kind of nondescript buildings. Ace Tomato Company is probably a reference to the United Fruit Company, which is a organization. It's a real fruit company. I think now it's actually Chiquita Banana.
Really?
But the CIA worked with them to do some pretty nasty stuff in Latin America during the Cold War. So, little inside joke.
Oh, wow.
We see a guy in a suit. He handcuffs himself to a briefcase, and he brings the photos to an office in DC with two other guys in suits, and they talk about the spy satellite program. It's actually a pretty funny scene because they make the guy who has his hand handcuffed to the briefcase go in a closet and like have the chain go through the door. I kind of thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, there are all these jokes, and this is where I start to think, okay, it's going to be kind of a zany, silly movie. They have some jokes where they pull the briefcase and the guy's like chained to it, so they drag him. But I was starting to get a little excited here, but it didn't work out too well.
It's the first joke of the movie, and it's it's one of the two best jokes in the movie.
It landed.
These two people appear to be, CIA type people. I think they're actually from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they are joined in this kind of secret meeting by two other military officers. It's kind of taking place in like a Georgetown row house, and these two military officials and the intelligence officers, they talk about a secret off the books, even from Congress, program. We don't really know what it is yet, but they're worried about leaks from the program to the Soviet Union because two of their top crew spies recently were killed in the course of this mission of operation. One of the generals in this really looks a lot like General Jack D. Ripper from Dr. Strangelove, so we know he's probably not up to any good. But anyways, the people are chatting. They wanted this mission to continue, so they decide they need to send out some more people. They have a new approach this time, right? They're going to form two teams of spies. One group that are going to be like the experts, right? The best spies in the world. And then they want another crew of two people who are kind of like schlumps, people who no one would miss. Maybe they can do a little bit of stuff, but they're going to be decoys to draw heat away from the real team. Where are they going to get people like this, right? They're going to have to get some sort of losers who are dumb enough to be part of this program, but not really realize that something else is going on.
Cut to the scene of Chevy Chase playing Emmett Fitzhume. He's, I guess, at the State Department, and he's at work, and he's kind of like he was watching some clip of like Ronald Reagan singing an old thing from the 50s or whatever, and his colleagues are all upset with him for not paying attention, but they're discussing that he's going to take the Foreign Service exam, which is what allows you to enter the Foreign Service. And from what I understand, a difficult test.
Yeah.
He's talking to the guy, and he's like, "Oh, you don't need to study. These questions are straightforward. Don't worry about it. Just go into it."
Yeah, he's an information officer, which is someone who has press conferences and should know everything that's going on in his region. He has this really kind of funny scene where he does hold a press conference and he doesn't obviously know any of the answers, so he just basically like deflects, and even has to the point where he like pretends the microphone's not working and he's trying to talk, and okay, I gotta go.
The United States government would never have, if our president had not, and as far as I know, that's the way it'll always be. Is that clear?
What about the report that... How can you say we aren't spending millions on spraying when the International Wheat Board has reported, and I quote, extensive contamination in the grain fields of southern Argentina?
The state this microphone's cutting out on us. I'm awfully sorry. However, it's unstate, so I must go.
This is some classic Chevy Chase, by the way. He does every now and then. He gets that good kind of silliness that he has.
The State Department has this program called the Foreign Service, and you can become a Foreign Service officer. I'm pretty sure Foreign Service officers don't also become spies. These are the people who will work at an embassy. Now, yeah. I'm sure there are people who work and pretend to be people who work at embassies that are also spies. Other countries do it, and so do we. But it's not like if you want to join that program, you become, you take the FSO test. He can do something else too. But he clearly wants to do something in overseas and undercover. And it's just kind of weird that he thinks this is the path to do this. But whatever he's doing, he's not studying. He instead thinks he can pass it because he will seduce his supervisor. And that doesn't work. We meet another character. We meet Dan Aykroyd. He plays Austin Milbarge. He is a brilliant, as we said, code breaker. He was working in the basement of the Pentagon. He doesn't really want to be there. He wants to be some sort of undercover Foreign Service officer too. His boss is pretty terrible, even though Austin is really smart and is able to break the codes using things out of a Cracker Jack box and cereal box.
That was a static-filled, triple-scrambled microwave transmission between two soldiers talking in Mandarin Chinese.
Well, the Chinese were only using a simple polyphonetically grouped 20 square digit key transposed in booster Verdonic form with multiple nulls. I broke it with this.
A Drogan's decoder wheel? They put these things into cereal boxes for kids.
Yeah, I found it in a box of Lucky Charms.
Is essentially all of his work is being who's taking credit for it, but his boss, and his boss wants to keep them there, as opposed to maybe Austin just quits and applies to another job. But instead, boss is like, no, you have the Foreign Service exam. It's tomorrow. You didn't study at all. You're definitely going to fail this and have to stay here.
It definitely sets up, Dan Aykroyd as kind of the smart, he's the not the goofus, he's the gallant of Goofus and Gallant. So you can kind of see where this is setting up. You got Chevy Chase as kind of the screw up, but the sweet talker, and Dan Aykroyd is the kind of brains, but not doing the best he can with them.
Now, this is 1 year after Ghostbusters, when Dan Aykroyd played Ray Stantz in Ghostbusters. He was also a pretty similar character, pretty smart, but also, hey, I'm from New York. I'm gonna cut some corners and get stuff done, but I know what I'm talking about when I need to. It's kind of a very similar character. Yeah,
I agree. I definitely had shades of that. I think it worked to better effect in Ghostbusters than this movie, though.
Yes, most definitely. Speaking of things that didn't work all that well, you get to the actual test, the Foreign Service exam test. Proctor of this examination is Frank Oz, which is always fun to see Frank Oz pop up in some of these things. The voice of Yoda. Immediately, Chevy Chase tries to bribe him with $1,000, but that doesn't work. Chevy Chase then starts to basically ask Aykroyd, because they're sitting next to each other. They're both late to the exam. Chevy Chase essentially asks for help during the exam, tries to cheat, but in these really blatant ways. He comes in with a eye patch and a cast that's a fake cast on his arm, essentially doing every kind of trick you can possibly do, because the eye patch actually has notes hidden, I think, for the test.
Yeah, and he has the fake arm. He pulls it out, and there's answers in the sleeve. And this was also, I enjoyed this, and I thought, the Chevy Chase once again, kind of physical comedy worked pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, though, that one of the questions that he tries to get an answer for from Dan Aykroyd is, what is KGB?
So I don't understand why Dan Aykroyd's character, Austin, he actually helps give him the answer to it. And I'm like, why? He's the good, the studious guy. Why is he helping this, schmuck?
Because the charisma and pure charm of Chevy Chase. I mean, if Chevy Chase asked you to help him cheat when he was, say, maybe, at a community college, for example, you would definitely help him, wouldn't you?
I would do a lot of things if Chevy Chase asked me to, probably.
It doesn't work out for them. They get caught in, hilarious ways. They get caught cheating on the exam, but they're exactly the two schlumps that the people behind the scenes, the two intelligence officers and rogue military people want for their program, because they clearly have some skills. Like you mentioned, one of them's a pretty smart talker, quick on his feet, and the other is capable and actually speaks a little bit of Russian. They're perfect for the program. They're smart, but also very disposable, and likely would not figure out what was happening.
Yeah, exactly.
They're happy to get the promotion, even though they don't know that it's fake, and they're immediately thrown into training. You want to talk a little bit about the scene where they're kind of starting their training, which is spy training, but it really does kind of seem a lot like they're becoming members of the Army's Special Forces or astronauts.
I didn't understand what this was. So they put him on a plane with all these parajumpers. And of course, Austin and Emmett are like, well, we're not going to have to jump out of this plane, are we? And of course they get, thrown out. So they parachute into these woods, and then these spotlights come on and all these ninjas come out. They're about to fight these ninjas. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And this guy comes out. He's the drill sergeant, training master, whatever. And he's like, why aren't you prepared for this? And we're going to put you through intense training. And it goes through this this whole like kind of montage-ish kind of thing of these like increasingly ridiculous training things. It starts with an obstacle course. They start like setting off explosives all over, and nobody's like acting like anything's different. Then they have to go into like a bog with people shooting at them. Then they have to get like shot with flamethrowers. They go in a G-force machine like astronauts would be in, and just like silly I guess it's trying to be like a spoof of the basic training montage, but it just was like weird stuff. It didn't work for me.
I just kept wondering, I know it's a joke, but I'm like, this just doesn't seem like spy work. This seems like if you wanted to become a member of SEAL Team 6.
Yeah, exactly.
But there is one really funny joke in there where they get put into it looks like an airplane, and then they say, okay, we're about to start the radical vertical impact simulation, and then they just basically put them in this airplane that has no wings, and they just drop them off like a 50-foot drop.
Yeah,
I thought that was very funny. You didn't like that as an airplane guy?
No, it did not land for me. I could see why that would tickle your fancy, but yeah, maybe it was bad. It was bad memories of my pilot training. That must have been it.
You probably never passed radical verticals
impact simulation. Yeah, that was a hard one.
Well, anyways, I guess they pass because Austin and Emmett are sent to Pakistan, and they, of course, end up crashing into a village in Pakistan. They get thrown out of the back of an airplane again. Not just any airplane, right?
Yeah, this was, okay, probably my favorite part of the movie. As you know, I like to talk about airplanes and sometimes hijack this podcast.
You like to take the super critical angle of attack on when we talk about things?
I do. One of my favorite airplanes, a C-119 flying boxcar, an old like twin empennage propeller plane that I just think it looks so cool. It's in that movie, the remake of Flight of the Phoenix. And yeah, that was my favorite thing. I got to see the flying boxcar. I'm like, all right, it at least gets 1 star for that for me. So that was cool. The nickname was the Flying Boxcar.
Flying Boxcar. Well,
yeah.
So the other plane, other than the Enola Gay, which dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, the other B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki, it was actually nicknamed Boxcar. It was Bockscar. Kind of a funny little connection there, I guess.
There you go.
But not the same plane. So they get dropped off in Pakistan. They're worried because they dropped onto a village, and they're worried people are about to shoot them with AK-47s, but they're met, fortunately, by their local contacts. But it turns out these local contacts are actually KGB Russian agents, which are there to, I guess they figured out that this team is here. They don't know that it's the decoy team, but fortunately for our team of heroes, quote-unquote, Aykroyd discovers that one of the Russians is wearing a Timex knockoff watch that was made in Russia. So they get the drop on him. They steal their Jeep. Then, of course, the Jeep is captured by Afghan freedom fighters because it's the 1980s and we're in Afghanistan and all that great stuff. We're kind of still in Afghanistan, I guess. Fortunately, there's a lot of these like, oh no, we're captured, now we're about to be saved kind of moments in this movie. Then the team is saved by these 2 doctors in a makeshift hospital, and the reason why they're able to do this is because Aykroyd and Chevy Chase pretend to be these famous surgeons.
Yeah, they're like, they're in some village where these doctors are providing, it's like Doctors Without Borders providing medical care. They kind of pose as these famous doctors. There's this like cringeworthy scene with Chevy Chase and one of the female doctors where she's like, oh, I've read all your papers and I'm so enamored by you. And of course, Chevy Chase takes the opportunity to fondle her. It's just bad. It doesn't hold up well.
Yeah, not so great these days.
Like seduce her. Yeah, exactly.
However, it is, before that awful stuff happens, there is one of the funniest scenes in the movie, which is it's Chevy Chase and Aykroyd. They're pretending to be doctors, and they're in a tent with like 5 or 6 other doctors, and they all do the doctor, like you would walk up to someone and say, "Hi, doctor," and the other one would respond with "doctor." But of course, they have to do it like 15 times in the movie, and then they do it again, so it becomes this like doctor.
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 And doctor.
Well, we miss anyone?
It's very like Leslie Nielsen-esque, like, yeah, airplane-esque kind of thing.
And then the best line is, as soon as everybody leaves the tent, like Aykroyd turns to Chevy Chase and says,
We're not doctors.
It's very, very funny.
Yeah, Bob Hope makes a cameo. He hits a golf ball in and it's like, oh, can I play through? It's very random. I know the name Bob Hope, but I just had no idea what that cameo was until you told me about that. So that makes sense.
But anyways, more hijinks ensue. They have to do like surgery on a Khan, a local Khan's brother, I think they said, and it doesn't go well. The Khan dies, and they have to escape, and of course they do. They're continuing to go somewhere. Back in the United States, we meet those intelligence officers. They go to meet up with the military, and they do it at a weird place, right? They do it like this abandoned drive-in movie theater in the middle of nowhere, and it turns out that's a secret military base for some sort of weapon system that they call the WAMP. I don't think it stands for anything, but it did remind me of, I guess this was probably somewhat around the time when War Games came out. This computer AI system that takes over our nuclear forces is called the Wamper, and I kept thinking that maybe the WAMP was a reference to the Wamper, but I have no idea if that actually is the case. We learned that the DIA agents and the military people are running this kind of secret program that costs $60 billion, and it's a Star Wars missile defense system. The Star Wars is what the media called Ronald Reagan's space-based laser and kinetic kill vehicle system that he wanted to design to shoot down incoming enemy missiles when they were in space. I'm not really sure why there's so much cloak and dagger stuff going on with this military program, because it sounds like they're even keeping it off the books from the president.
Yeah.
Congress certainly gave a pretty decent amount of money to the Reagan administration to build Star Wars, but whatever. The whole drive-in theater is this sort of space-based laser system.
The people from the beginning of the movie, these two DIA agents, and so they decide they're going to reassign the team, Emmett and Austin, to go into the Soviet district in Tajikistan, which, by the way, very interesting how this was very topical at the time with the Soviet-Afghan war and all that. Modern viewer, it doesn't necessarily hold up, where you have to do a little bit of reading to familiarize yourself. I know I just read a little bit about that, but I didn't realize that this was actually going on at that time, so it makes sense that a lot of this is in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, this area.
Well, it's back in the news now with the reports of Russian intelligence agencies potentially paying a bounty to kill American and coalition troops.
Exactly.
This movie is a little bit of the other side of that, when the United States was supportive of Afghan fighters against the Soviet Union. In a weird way, this movie is kind of timely. As you mentioned, Emmett and Austin, they're going to the border. They meet up again for a second with the doctor team that we met, the woman that Chevy Chase was trying to put the moves on. He takes the opportunity to sexually harass her a little bit again.
Sure, because why not?
She's actually one of the spies from the A-team, the good team that they're supposed to be the decoys for. But anyways, the main stuff here before we get into the new bit here is that Austin and Emmett, they run into the Soviet police on the road. Austin runs away. Emmett just kind of like gives up. He's captured, I think, in a pretty funny interrogation scene by the Russian police. They threaten to like beat him up. At one point, they're like, "I'm going to cut your fingers off." And then one of the other guys punches Chevy Chase and he says, "Why would you punch me? He's going to cut my fingers off." He doesn't give up the mission because he doesn't know what the mission even is. He just says that he's there to assassinate the premier, which is pretty funny.
I really like this scene, actually, because it's kind of like they're getting pulled over by like highway. It's like being pulled over by highway patrol. So it's like a cop car with like flashing lights, but there's Russian stuff on the side and the people coming out were Russian. It was actually kind of cool. And actually another bright spot of this movie for me was, in a lot of these movies, the Russian is very like, kind of, you can hear the accent and it's just speaking English with Russian accents. Here, it seems like they actually had Russian actors speaking Russian and there's not a lot of subtitles, so you kind of are lost a little bit. And actually, they did a fairly good job with that. So I enjoyed, this was the first of those scenes where you have these two guys speaking Russian and Aykroyd and Chevy Chase are trying to figure out what's going on, but it sounded and looked the part. I like that.
Cool. I'm glad that there's a little bit of a bright spot in the movie for you. So the real team, the A team, they get ambushed as well. I think the female doctor, she survives, but her partner is killed, and I think her name is Karen in the movie. She runs into Austin, and they agree to save Emmett and complete the mission. Of course, they do that in a big action scene, and then they go on to do their final mission, and here's where we get to the nuke stuff. So after they rescue Emmett, the whole team, Austin, Emmett, and Karen, they run into the SS-50 long-range rocket mobile launcher that we meet at the beginning of the movie. And Aykroyd's, of course, he knows the stuff, right? He knows all these things. He's looking through binoculars.
Right.
And he says,
"That's an SS-50 long-range rocket and mobile launcher.
They just moved it in here. Haven't even put up their locator beacon. Means they're not hooked into Soviet defense chain.
Wait a minute, what are we doing here?"
This is our final objective. Our project orders are to subdue the crew and seize control of this emplacement.
Hold it, sister. We're not going near that thing. That missile is tipped with a 40-megaton fission fusion nuclear warhead.
Good night, everybody.
Where are you going?
Home.
For once, I am in complete agreement with my friend here. I think we should all get up and leave this place immediately. You know what those things can do? Suck the paint off your house and give your family a permanent orange afro.
All right, decode this for us, Tim.
So a megaton bomb like that would certainly be a fission fusion bomb, right? It uses the energy from the fission reaction, which is not easy, but it's easier than a fusion reaction. You use the fission of splitting atoms of uranium and plutonium. You use the energy, X-rays, gamma rays, to fuse together two light elements of hydrogen, which produces even a larger explosion than you would normally get just by itself. So that science is all there. But the problem is that 40 megatons is insanely high. No one has ever fielded a 40 megaton bomb.
Okay.
The largest ever nuclear detonation, which was simply a test, is called, the code name of it was Tsar Bomba. It was a Soviet test. That was 50 megatons, but we've never deployed anything large like that in the field. The largest Russian ever weapon was on the SS-18 missile, which was 25 megatons. The largest ever U.S. weapon was the B-41, which was dropped from an airplane, and that was 25 megatons. So 40 is just huge, right? You might as well say 1,000 megatons. It's way too big, and it's certainly way too big for anything that they would have had on that kind of a system.
So you had mentioned at the beginning that there was this analogous real-life missile system. Was it the SS-25, the sickle? So how does the sickle compare to the weed whacker from the movie?
Well, I mean, clearly the SS-50 is twice as cool and awesome as the SS-25 because the math just checks out there. So everything is doubly awesome. So the SS-25, this is a real-life weapon system. Like I said, it was deployed officially in 1985. It's a 20.5 meter long missile. This can launch a payload of 1,000 kilograms, which is pretty big, a big payload into space, and it can hit a target 1,000 kilometers away. So really anywhere you need to on Earth. This particular system, is not a 50 megaton warhead. It would often be equipped with a warhead of around 550 to 800 kilotons. So megaton is 1 million tons, a kiloton is 1,000 tons, so clearly pretty different.
Yeah, like 2 orders of magnitude less than what they try to say in the movie.
Right, exactly. And the reason why you don't need a 50 megaton bomb, the reason is because the Russian weapon wasn't terrible in terms of its accuracy. It was 900 meters, which is called of CEP, circular error probability, which meant that if you would draw a circle with 900 meters as the radius, 50% of the time the warhead would land in that circle, and 50% it would land outside that circle. 900 meters isn't terrible when you have a warhead of that particular size. The only reason you would need a much larger warhead like that is because you were trying to destroy a hardened target, like a missile silo, like the U.S. silos. But road mobile missile systems are often not designed to be a first strike weapon, something to try to start the war and destroy the enemy's weapons before they can get to you. Okay. These things, the whole theory behind road mobile systems is that they would be designed to improve deterrence and warfighting by making it a much harder target, because most weapons of the United States, or anybody that has like a ballistic missile, it follows a ballistic path. Right, you point a target, you shoot it into space. It doesn't really course correct all that much. There's a little bit of stuff just to kind of make sure that it's hitting its target. Once it's in the air and once it's in space, it follows like if you were to throw a ball into across the field. It will follow the path and it won't really change that particular path. So if your target moves, then you can't really know where that is, and you have to try something else. You have to try drop a bomb from an airplane or use a cruise missile, which has a little bit of capability to adjust, but really not a moving target. The reason why you have a road mobile system is because you get these things when there's a crisis. Normally all these trucks are at a base, They were actually at 9 different bases in the Soviet Union. There's a crisis, you scramble them, you get them on the road, they go on a combat patrol, you don't know where they are, so it's much harder to actually hit them, and that's kind of why the Soviet Union had so many of them. They needed to make these things survivable, and the reason why they did that, it was because the Soviet Union was not particularly good at building these concrete, hardened silos that the U.S. could, where they put their missiles underground, so they had to come up with something a little bit better.
So let me ask you, Tim, why, first of all, did the U.S. build anything analogous, like these kind of mobile launchers? And second, I think you mentioned at the beginning that the U.S. went more with the different route. Why didn't we follow the same kind of strategy as the Soviets here?
So since the 1960s, the United States and a lot of the people, maybe in the Air Force in particular, were like, yeah, let's build a road mobile system. It's cool. Like, there are benefits to it being something that you can easily survive a first strike, because you get them on the road and no one's going to be able to find them. I thought about that since the 1960s. The civilians, the military officials, at various points debated about that, but really it was a combination of 3 things. One was bureaucratic rivalry between the Air Force and the Navy. They both wanted a slice of the nuclear budget, so they both had the competing systems. One of them was the Minuteman silo under the ground weapons, the rockets that you have out in the missile fields in Colorado and the Dakotas. And in the Navy had the Polaris submarine rocket system. Road mobile system wasn't ready, and it was new. In the course of kind of conflict amongst bureaucratic budget fighting, the Air Force knew that the missiles in the ground worked, so they put all of their eggs in that basket, and the Navy said, I got the Polaris system, we'll get that going. And then eventually Polaris got so good, it became the thing that was the quote-unquote survivable, doesn't have to get destroyed by a first strike, it can be in the ocean, you don't know where they are, and it can respond to retaliate against an incoming attack. Once that was sorted out, there was no longer a justification to have a road mobile system because it's redundant on top of the other thing. They kept trying over the years to get the system going. There was eventually, in the early 1990s, there was a system called the MGM-134A Midget Man. It was called the Midget Man because it was smaller than the Minuteman. This was in prototype development in the early 1990s, but of course, the Cold War ended, and the program was canceled in 1992. So there's a lot of history there about kind of why they tried with certain systems, and there was even to the point, you might be interested in this, in addition to road mobile systems, the United States also really heavily looked into putting a ICBM missile inside of an airplane, like commercial airplanes kind of thing, like a C-130, because then what the idea is, the C-130 kind of like always is in the air, and then it gets dropped out of the back of the plane because it's already in the air, and so much of the energy you need to launch a rocket is literally to get it from the ground into the air.
Sure.
That was one of the tracks that people looked into. We also looked into having vast canals of waterways, and the missiles would hide in the waterways.
Okay.
The Russians also have missiles on trains. The United States talked about that, having maybe some missiles on some trains. But yeah, we didn't end up building any of those. We really just stuck to the big 4, which eventually became the big 3. We had stuff in the Army that was like rocket artillery, and we had submarines that were built, and we have those today. We have the bombers, and we have the missiles that are in the ground. So that's kind of how we ended up.
It's interesting from a non-educated person on this kind of stuff, because you see a lot of other, the fighter jets look similar, the tanks look similar. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that there would be 2 very different approaches to something that you figure there'd be, just one way to do it. But it's interesting that we and the Soviets went down 2 different paths.
I mean, certain countries are at the mercy of geography. The United Kingdom couldn't have missile fields because it's not very big. The idea of a missile field is you have a huge area where you can put missiles that could launch in silos, but you spread them out so one warhead from the enemy couldn't destroy multiple ones. Sure. And you need lots of land to do that. The United Kingdom doesn't have that. France doesn't have that. So all of their stuff is in the United Kingdom are in submarines because they have ports, and French had most of their stuff in submarines and airplanes. Chinese, a lot of their stuff is in road mobile systems because they have lots of mountains that they can hide these road mobile systems in, and they don't have a lot of ground-based silos. but they have submarines now, and they also have aircraft. So really it became down to what can you build and what works out well for you. The India and Pakistan are mostly focused on, I think Pakistan, most of their stuff is on aircraft that can drop. The Indians now have a little bit of everything, but they don't have, they don't have everything. So it kind of you can't have to pick and choose. Yeah, the other benefit of road mobile systems is you can build a bunch of trucks. It's expensive to build a weapon, a nuclear weapon, and a missile, but if you just build a truck and you have like a fake empty tube on the top of it, maybe you fill it with concrete, you can then have that be a potential target. So you have these missiles that are essentially on the back of a truck, a chassis. The SS-25 was actually 7 axles. It's huge. This thing can carry a lot of stuff. And on top of this chassis, and these are designed for cross-country travel, probably not through the woods or anything like that. On top of them is something called a transporter erector launcher, TEL or TEL. The rocket is always, usually horizontal. In the movie, it just looks like a missile on top of the back of the truck. SS-25 system missile is actually in a tube, because the idea is you set it in a tube, it kind of protects the missile. The enemy doesn't really know if inside the tube is a real missile or not, so that way you can have decoys that go around. You don't really know whether or not there's actually a missile on top or anything. And the erector would get to a spot where it goes to launch. It would then, make the rocket go vertical, and then it would launch. And if you have it in a tube, the tube gets destroyed. You throw the tube off, and then you can reload another missile inside another tube. It's called cold launching, and that way you don't actually destroy the system. In the movie, you can see clearly the TEL is destroyed once they go to launch it a little bit later. The other thing that's different from the movie versus the real life is that there's also a mobile command system that follows the truck. So usually there's the missile launcher truck, and then there's this mobile command post. And this is something that gets set up, and you get all the different satellite dishes that come up out of this thing. And that's a whole set of crew that work that as well.
Okay.
And that's something you have to kind of go along with it. But what it does, it allows you to launch separate, completely independent from your home base of operations.
I mean, in the movie, there's kind of the only people you see around this missile, there's this team of Russians. It's like Emmett, I think, says it's 3 men, their mother, and then this scantily clad woman, because of course you're just going to put that in there.
Vanessa Angel, who is very much not Russian. You ever see the movie Kingpin?
Yes.
She's the woman that goes with Quaid and that whole crew. Quaid and Woody Harrelson. But in this movie, I think it's her first movie. She plays a Russian missileer.
I don't think she has one speaking line in it, which is interesting. But she's not there to talk. But this crew, right? And they're all kind of sitting around. They like build a campfire next to the thing, and they're drinking vodka and like singing and dancing as they're spying on them. Is that at all realistic that they would just be out there with this missile? Or
I was trying to find about what was the size of the missile crews on these road mobile systems. It's a lot more than the number in the movie. The number in the movie I think was like 4 or 5. It's larger because there has to be people that work both the missile and this mobile command system.
Okay.
Which is why the Russians, even though that they built these things, they didn't build, thousands of them. Even at their peak, there was about 288 missiles, road mobile missiles of the SS-25s. They were based at 9 different bases in the Soviet Union, and they haven't been made since 1994. But they're still actually in service, but not for much longer. We're recording this in 2020. I think in 2022 is when they're going to be replaced by a new system called the SS-27.
Okay.
Not the SS-50. They haven't gotten that high yet. Just the SS-22. And that was a new system that's designed, ironically, kind of a twist for what we'll talk about here in a second for the movie Spies Like Us. The SS-27 is part of its payload will be a bunch of decoys that are meant to confuse a missile defense system. There'll be a bunch of like fake things that look like warheads in space that are going to confuse any sort of kind of incoming missile defense system and all that stuff. It's definitely more people in real life versus this crew. And the other thing is just like these missiles don't just like go hang out and drive around by themselves. They're on either a combat patrol. You don't have to hide these things because you just don't know where they are, or when you hit them, you have to like know where they are when your missiles can hit them. When they're you have to know where they're going to be, which is a lot harder. These things often are based simply at their home base of operation, and they can actually launch from their base. They drive under like a canopy system, and it allows them to still launch. But yeah, it's a comedy, right? So you get the people around the campfire. They're like trying to identify and listen to like American rock and roll music.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun, I guess.
Back to the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So while this team of Russians is there with the missile, Karen, the spy, she reveals that the mission is going to be to seize control of this ICBM to secure the freedom of every American. I have no idea what that means.
And I don't think they even know, right? They're just told that this is what they're supposed to do. This is a pretty serious thing, by the way. This is like an act of war.
Yeah, but whatever. They're idiots, so they're going to go along with it. Austin doesn't want to get too close to the dangerous warhead, but they're already, well within the bad area.
Yeah, according to Nuke Map, which is a fun website I know that you're familiar with because I talk about it all the time. You can go to it. It's created by Alex Wellerstein, but you can plug in a bomb and a target, and you can see what the effects will be. According to this 40 megaton bomb, you got to be like 5 miles away to not even be immediately vaporized.
Okay.
They have some sort of plan to take over the system, and it involves a nighttime raid with tranq darts, and the way they're going to distract the guards is to dress up like aliens from a UFO, and it's just a scene of people in these like big... Most of this movie, I think, is made so that Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase can dress up in like traditional Tajik like coats.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of large coats in this movie.
For some reason, they're able to get glow sticks and Christmas lights from somewhere, and they pretend to be aliens, and this freaks out, right, the Russians, because I guess they're confused and think that these people, which are clearly just people, are aliens, but it distracts them enough to be shot by darts.
The Russians are also drinking a ton of vodka, so
that's it. That'll do it. We've all been there. They capture the ICBM, and then they're told that they have to enter launch codes, which I guess they have. They have launch codes for the Soviet missile. They launch a missile into space.
Go with numbered sequence. 74-74-883-5-3.
And then they all of a sudden go, what did we just do?
I think we just started World War III.
Что вы натворили? Вы что, с ума сошли?
She wants to know why we would do such a thing.
Tell her so do we.
And here, up until now, there's a lot of like, even though they're talking about the A team and the B team, we still have no idea what the whole plot is. And now it starts to come together. You go back to this drive-in movie theater, the military officials there, they issue the override codes to tell command that this is a false alarm, that the missile has launched. So clearly something strange is going on.
SATCOM confirms an outbound blip from Soviet Central Asia.
It's on its way. Override all SAC alerts with error stand-down orders for 10 minutes.
SAC override code entered.
Yeah, and then the whole drive-in all of a sudden becomes like this laser system where there's a big laser, there are mirrors, everything gets set up to launch an attack against this incoming, missile. The missile actually looks pretty good at the beginning because a lot of these movies, it's just the missile as it gets launched from its silo or from its launcher. It's the thing that travels through space and then hits the ground, like you see in the Superman movie that we watched, Superman 4. This one actually breaks up into a series of stages, except it doesn't keep going. It kind of stops somewhere in the middle, so you get like half of the rocket. A warhead often just looks like an ice cream cone with no ice cream, and that little pointy triangle thing kind of travels through space. But the spies, they don't know what's going on. They think something's about to happen. They know that World War III is going to happen. Austin does the math to determine that it's going to be 28 minutes until the missile reaches its target.
It's 4:47 a.m. They're saying it'll be 28 minutes before the rocket detonates above its target, somewhere inside the continental United States. Let's see, 28 minutes. That's 18 until it's inside the U.S. radar cup. Figure 2 for our response. Say 20 until total commitment. Figure 20, 22 until the first impact of our retaliatory strike. I figure we have 42 minutes until the end of civilization as we know it.
Which actually is pretty accurate. The movie says that it's 18 minutes until it reaches U.S. radar. That's probably closer to 15, but still it's pretty close. They say it's 2 minutes for the U.S. to respond. Usually that means it's actually closer to 2 to 3 minutes, according to most open source. And that means they talk to the president, they go through the options, the president makes a decision. All of that has to happen basically within like 4 to 5 minutes. The movie says it takes 20 minutes, but I don't really know what this means. They say that 20 minutes is a total commitment. But the point is that it gets actually pretty close to how long it takes. It takes about 4 to 5 minutes from once the president says, all right, we're going to launch, and the president completes their authentication, usually with the nuclear football, or maybe they're on the mobile command system, or maybe they're at the Pentagon or the Situation Room. 4 to 5 minutes for the missiles to get out of their silos, and about 15 minutes for submarines to surface and launch. And then they say it takes about 20 to 22 minutes until all of the U.S. missiles end up hitting. So anyways, that's pretty close, but all of this math eventually kind of catches up to them, and then they realize, oh, we only have about 25 minutes until the end of the world for them, so let's spend those last kind of 40 minutes or so breaking into small groups, and they all kind of go into different tents to...
Yeah, adult time. Enjoy your last few minutes on the Earth with the stranger.
You want to go out with a bang?
But hopefully, right, the missile defense system works.
Well, okay, so it doesn't. Surprise, surprise. But what I don't understand is, why is this elaborate plan to like hijack and launch a real Russian missile to do this? Why not just do a test with you set off your own missile that doesn't have a nuclear warhead? Why does that have to be this live test? I know there was like this...
when we test a missile defense system. A missile usually leaves Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, and then they try to shoot it down.
They kind of explain this. There's like this crazed general who's like, we don't want the nuclear weapons are no good just sitting around. A nuclear weapon sitting around is wasted. And apparently there was a study commissioned by the Schmechtel Corporation, which is it's a spoof on Bechtel, a real life corporation.
Yeah. We missed it, sir. We missed the rocket. It didn't work.
We better call the president.
We're not calling anyone.
What do you mean we're not calling anyone? The president must know that this attack was not initiated by the Soviet Union.
We are prepared for this contingency.
What in hell do you intend to do? I mean, you understand, sir, that we are responsible for launching a nuclear weapon against our own country.
No one outside this command center has that information, gentlemen.
When we commissioned the Schmechtel Corporation to research this precise event sequence scenario, it was determined that the continual stockpiling and development of our nuclear arsenal was becoming self-defeating. A weapon unused is a useless weapon.
SATCOM confirms all defense systems, commitment ready.
We have verification. The president is aboard the Airborne Command Center now.
I'm sure it'll only be a matter of minutes before the president commits to total release.
Right, they're just like, oh, no big deal. And I'm almost wondering, do you think that the generals sabotage the test so that this is their excuse to start World War III? I mean, they didn't ever explain any of this, but I was wondering that myself when I watched it.
Well, it's a great question. This general I mentioned at the beginning, who's pretty great in the movie, he's played by an actor named Steve Forrest, who actually looks a lot like the actor that plays General Jack D. Ripper in Dr. Strangelove. In Dr. Strangelove, the plot of that is that General Jack D. Ripper orders his heavy bombers, his B-52s, to attack Russian targets, and then they're not able to recall the bombers. And that's kind of his whole plan, because he wants to force the president of the United States to make a commitment to go full nuclear, to start World War III and not let the Russians retaliate. So he wants to start World War III because he feels it's inevitable. I guess they could be channeling that, but my impression was that they were comfortable with if it didn't work. But if it would have worked, they also would have been fine with that too. I don't really know. They missed it by a pretty big distance, and I think that might have been a joke, like, oh, Reagan's missile defense system, even as much money you put into it, it doesn't work. That kind of sounds like the politics of a Dan Aykroyd and Dave Thomas.
Maybe this movie was an elaborate, like, sick burn on, because at the beginning of the movie, Chevy Chase is watching that clip of Ronald Reagan singing. Maybe we're actually in a Starship Troopers like situation where this movie was like deep commentary, and we missed it because we were just like, oh, this is a crappy movie, but actually like they're trying to say something really deep and meaningful here, and we're just sitting here like crapping on it.
I mean, it's funny because you actually have in real life, when we do a missile defense test, it's not like the guys and gals who are running the missile defense system are sleeping or they're at their desk and they don't know when the test is going to happen. It's not like they don't know exactly where the missile is going to travel and what, they don't know the telemetry. Like, of course they do. They know everything. They know where the missile is going to be. And they often still miss more than they'd hit their targets. Even with all of that, because they knew where the target was, because they told them the launch path to fire, they still missed. The only other thing I wanted to mention was that in the missile defense system, you see two people use like the 2-man rule where there's 2 keys being turned at the same time. That makes a lot of sense when you're launching a weapon because you don't want one person to launch it. You want 2 people to do it. It does not make any sense when you're trying to hit an incoming missile because the window you have to do that is so narrow.
Yeah.
You automate that. You don't have 2 people have to fumble with keys to launch the system. Like, it's just really weird.
It does make for a good movie, though.
Yeah, we love our 2 keys.
It builds drama nicely.
I can't convince my wife to let me put a 2-man key rule on the front door of our house.
And you'd have like passcodes and everything.
Yeah.
If you had your way, your poor wife would be walking around with a briefcase like handcuffed to her arms all the time with like codes for stuff, and life would not be very fun for her.
Well, you never checked the inside of my coat pocket. I've got the biscuit with the nuclear launch authentication codes in my pocket.
God.
The next time you see me in a suit, pat me down and or maybe not. Oh, wait. Well, anyways, the president is now told that there is an incoming missile, and the president is now making the decision above the airborne command post to launch a retaliatory strike, because the president doesn't realize this is some sort of secret attack actually started by our own spies. He thinks the Russians are just launching an attack for no reason on Detroit. Fortunately, again, in the afterglow of their conjugal visit in the tent, Austin, he's kind of lamenting accidentally starting the end of the world with nuclear war, but he says he's at least happy that he can rub it in the nose of his high school guidance counselor, he proved them wrong, that he actually ended up doing something with his life.
Hard to believe it's been only 15 minutes since I destroyed the world. In another 15 minutes, it'll all be over. Such a short time to destroy a world. And to think my high school guidance counselor said I'd never amount to anything. Just goes to show...
Guidance? Source programmable guidance! Fitzhume! Boyer, get up! Get up!
That triggers something in his head that he can use the ground programmable guidance system and recall the missile. And there's a bunch of like technobabble that happens afterwards. He says,
I think we can recall it.
What do you mean recall it? Mean like a defective Pinto?
We can divert it. It's made to respond to in-flight commands through their SAT relay network. All we have to do is switch sending boards. Start sending the launch sequence in reverse order.
Yes, sir.
They cause the missile to kind of fly further into space and detonate. All of the U.S. and Russian missiles also are recalled. Again, we'll talk about whether or not you can actually do that.
SATCOM confirms destruction of the inbound at Zulu, 3,000 hours.
What about the rest of their inbounds?
There are none, sir. Both U.S. and Soviet response chain on full recall.
Damn. Recall.
The military officials are upset, but then the army breaks in and arrests everybody, and everybody kind of goes to jail.
What I don't understand is why didn't Austin stop the launch from happening beforehand? Like, why wait until afterwards? And he only had, I guess, actually seeing the missile launch gave this realization for some reason.
I think there's 2 things. One, he didn't realize that what they were doing. Maybe he thought they were going to launch this into the ocean, perhaps.
Okay.
If they didn't know it was going to hit Detroit. And 2,
Sure.
I mean, who knows what's going on with this one. But anyways, everyone's saved, and we get this kind of quick scene at the very end of the movie. There are disarmament talks at Geneva. There's lots of press outside of a door. Chevy Chase comes out and says the negotiations are difficult, they're tense, but we might be able to get, nuclear negotiations to end all weapons in the world. Because we came so close, right?
Mr. Fitzhume.
Hi, Ed.
Everybody at home is most anxious to know how things are going in there.
Well, Ed, right now we're at an extremely sensitive juncture. And, of course, the slightest misperceived phrase or gesture could upset everything we've achieved to date. Now, if you'll excuse me, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhume.
Thank you, Ed.
And it turns out that Emmett, as the U.S. Chief State Department negotiator, him and Austin are just in this room, and instead of actual negotiations, they're playing some sort of game that's like a mix of Trivial Pursuit and Risk with the people we met earlier from the mobile launcher crew. They've all been promoted, and they're playing this game that if you answer a question correctly or incorrectly, it determines whether or not your missiles are being taken out of the certain countries.
What Little Richard song
was the title of a 1950s movie starring Jane Mansfield.
Great Balls of Fire?
Wrong! It was The Girl Can't Help It!
Sorry, you lose.
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's a pretty novel way of tackling the nuclear arms race, but, it's just nice to see everybody get a bunch of promotions.
Yeah.
Everybody makes out at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's a weird ending.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, we already talked about the launchers. We talked about a bunch of nuke stuff. Tim, there's some other stuff here. I mean, first of all, this whole rogue plot, the rogue nuke plot to have this weird test that happens. I mean, what's your take on this?
Well, it's bonkers, right? It's silly. It's a comedy, sure, but it also just, if your comedy doesn't have, that the plot is like, what is this? This doesn't make any sort of sense. Maybe it's just me, but that distracts a lot from the jokes, because you have to have some kind of backbone to why something makes sense. Like, it'd be as if instead of in Chevy Chase's movie National Lampoon's Vacation, instead of him going on a vacation to Wally World, he was like, we're going to dig a hole in the middle of the desert and we're going to go to the center of the earth, and here's how we're going to... Like, if that was his vacation, you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, but there's some funny jokes about whether or not they're hitting the mantle or something. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense, but, like, it's weird. It's a weird plot. I don't understand it, because either the CIA and the military people, if the test worked and they destroy the missile, I guess they would look like heroes because they saved the day with this, like, off-the-books missile defense program. Like, you told us we couldn't build it, but we built it. Please don't put us in jail because we saved the world. But then all of a sudden you're kind of stuck with this scenario where you have a missile system, and now the Russians and the Chinese and others are going to be really upset that you have this system that can destroy their missiles all of a sudden, because now, the one thing about missile defense is that Ronald Reagan liked missile defense because he thought if he could build a system that could destroy any incoming missiles, and hopefully other people could also build that, then we don't have to worry about nuclear war anymore, because people would just shoot down missiles. Other people who promoted missile defense thought, well, look, if we have a great shield, that is actually kind of like an offensive weapon, because we could launch a first strike and destroy 70% of their weapons, and then the shield would protect against the final amount, and therefore we can win a nuclear war. And that's why the Russians and the Chinese are so upset about missile defense, is because if you have a missile defense, you no longer have mutually assured destruction if one side can destroy their incoming missiles. So therefore, you have to have better weapons, more weapons to overwhelm the system. That's why missile defense is a very contentious system, why you don't actually see it, other than the fact that it doesn't really work. This team of rogue generals and intelligence officers can save the day. You're still left with the impression, though, that the Russians did a first strike against the United States. Yeah. So then you would start World War III kind of no matter what. It's an active war. Or you have to reveal the spy plot and then kind of risk the consequences of striking your own country. And then the Russians and the President of the United States would be really upset. It didn't seem like the military's plan was to start World War III at the beginning, but I don't know. If it is, it's just Dr. Strangelove, which is already a comedy, but instead of it being a comedy that comments in a satire about our actual deterrence system, it just parodies that, and it doesn't really make much more sense of that. It's a parody of a parody that doesn't really work all that well.
Well, just from the layperson perspective, I mean, even the scenes where they're in the command center and there's the DIA people and the generals, there's no humor there. It just feels like a serious movie.
Right.
Whereas at least Dr. Strangelove, it's funny when you see the people like bickering and talking and everything. Like for a comedy, they should have at least had some level of humor and silliness with this like missile defense, but it was almost like half like the serious movie got spliced in with a zany comedy, and it didn't work. The reason, like something like going back to Ghostbusters, I mean, all the stuff they're fighting is like just crazy and silly, a giant marshmallow. Whereas here it was like a real, it was something you'd see in a James Bond movie. It just didn't work for me that way.
It still doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make sense to me, like, how did the army figure out what was happening that quickly in the middle of when they thought World War III was starting? Why is that a priority for them if they think that actually the world is ending?
Yeah.
There's a lot there that everything kind of wraps up pretty quickly. But the thing that, really gets my gears going, grinds them, you would say, is in a movie where there's a recall of a ballistic missile, you cannot recall ballistic missiles once they are launched. especially the long-range nuclear ones. And because there's a concern that if you put a recall option, maybe it's like a radio or a red abort button or something, is the plot of this movie. People are concerned that the enemies will figure out your code and they will figure out some kind of way to abort the missile.
Right.
It doesn't hit its actual target. They've talked about this. People who design missiles, they've talked about, well, there could be an active recall where you push a button and it sends out a signal and that destroys the rocket. Then there's maybe a passive system that what will happen is that the missile will detect a signal that says go, 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 like continue your path, that then you can shut off. And then the rocket will stop working. But then what if you jam that signal? This debate has been happening, and that's the reason why it's important. This is not just a nitpick, really. It is important for people to realize that a president has so little time to make a decision about what to do in the middle of a launch. Like we talked about, it's like 3 to 4 minutes for them to make that decision because of the narrow window of launch. They only have like really 5 to 10 minutes to make the decision whether or not to end the world. If they make that decision and they have to make it quickly because of the way that we structure our deterrent system, and then we realize it's a false alarm or it's some sort of weird zany plot that the generals are doing, there isn't a recall button. We're screwed. That's why it's so tense how close we've gotten so many times during this Cold War. And even after the Cold War in 1995, there was the Russians thought that we had launched a missile coming at Moscow, but it was like it was a weather satellite out of Norway. We thought that a flock of birds coming across the Canadian border was an incoming bomber strike from the Russians. So we scrambled and eventually figured it out. But these are the kind of scary moments that people, if they just watch a movie, they're just like, oh, well, we'll just recall the missiles. It's not a problem. It doesn't work that way. It's always a minor nitpick, but if you talk to a lot of people, as I do, when we get to our, when we used to be able to get together at, like, say, a barbecue. Remember those things?
Yes. Yeah. Those fun. Yeah. Now we just eat roasted meats on Zoom, staring at each other awkwardly.
You can't get that smell good across Zoom. But when we used to chat about this stuff, I would ask people, like, if you think a missile could be recalled, you can recall a bomber up to a certain point. And that's a reason why we have one of the reasons why we have bombers is because you can signal to the other side, look, I'm serious about starting World War III. You need to back down. I have my bombers in the air. And then you can send them a code that recalls the bombers up to a certain point until the point where they go past the point of no return. You can't do that with missiles. So people that think that you could hit an abort button at the last second, that Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible movies can hit that red button to shut everything down, it doesn't exist. So we better be really careful about what we do and maybe don't have our missiles on this hair trigger launch within 2 seconds, both from a technical perspective as well from a deterrence policy perspective.
So, yeah, I don't know what else to say on this other than
that's all the nuke stuff that I got.
It's just a bad cap to a pretty lame movie.
But it is cool to see the road mobile system in a movie. There's not a lot of movies that show that system.
Okay.
And in particular, because 1985 was when this really started with the Russians. They had road mobile systems that were short range, like Scuds, but it's just kind of really interesting to see it in a movie. And I really can't think of a lot of other movies that have this. But that's the nuke stuff. Let's do our parking lot movie discussion. Let's talk about the non-nuclear things. This is the kind of stuff that I would do when I was in high school, and we would go watch a movie, and when we were done with it, we would hang out in the parking lot and talk about it before we went our separate ways. First question I have for you is the actual original ending to this movie, and I couldn't find the script or a scene of this somewhere on YouTube or anything, but the original ending to this movie was actually they weren't able to recall the missile, and the world ended. But test audiences, and again, I don't know if this is true, but this is where this is what the internet says it was the original ending. Test audiences did not like it, so they had to film another ending that we do see in a soundstage in Burbank. Do you think a darker ending would have, like a la Doctor Strangelove, which ends with the end of the world, basically, unless you were able to get in one of the bunkers, in one of the mine shafts? Do you think that would have saved this movie? Would that have been like, oh, that's kind of funny? Or was the ending that ended up happening something that you prefer?
No, I mean, I don't think it would have saved it. To me, the real issue with the movie is just a lack of more like natural funny situations that they get put into. And even the way that Austin ends up saving the day, it's not by anything funny or silly. It's just he has a brilliant idea and executes it, right? And that would have been even more confusing. This, like, what is this? Is this a comedy? Is this some sort of deep existential thing? Is this a commentary on nuclear disarmament and nuclear threat? Yeah, I don't think by the time you get to the end, there's nothing that could have saved it for me, at least. I don't know. What about you, Tim? What do you?
I think that it would have been kind of funny to see Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase's characters trying to make it in the world, maybe like the end of the world, and they're in a bunker, but they're still doing their nonsense, trying to be the best spies out there. But I don't know. I guess the original ending is probably a little bit too dark. I have to see what happened. Like, if the world just ends and that's the end of the movie, that's not as good, but it would have been fine for a sequel. It could have been like another one of those road movies, but it's like the road through the apocalypse, and them trying to be zany through the end of the world. It could have worked, maybe. How well do you think that Aykroyd and Chase worked together in this movie? Do you think that there was some good chemistry? Because separately, they're really good. They're on a few other comedies together. Do you think that it works well for this team together? I guess originally it was meant to be Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, and I actually think that would have worked really well. Maybe a little bit of a better chemistry, similar to Blues Brothers. But it would have been funny to see John Belushi as a spy. What do you think about how well this movie goes? Because I know you're a big fan of Community, and Chevy Chase is pretty big in that. How well do you think that the team of Chase and Aykroyd work in this film?
Yeah, it actually did work for me. I am a Chevy Chase fan from the National Lampoon series. I remember watching that kind of growing up and liking him, although he's apparently not the nicest guy, but whatever. I think it worked. I mean, the problem was I was waiting for these good, I felt like it was building up and they were going to have all these gags set up and they just all kind of fell flat. Like this, the one where they're doing the surgery, it was just like a lot of build up and tension. And then it wasn't really that funny. And it gets cut short by the guy, the patient randomly dying and they get out of it. Or, there was some stuff like when they get pulled over by the Russian cops and there's some back and forth that's funny, but all in all, I was expecting better from this comedy duo, especially when you start off when they're taking the test together and they have that like back and forth. I thought, all right, cool. This is going to set it up. It's going to be, I know what each of them, their role is. Chevy Chase is like the smooth talking clown, and then Dan Aykroyd is the serious one, but it never fulfilled itself. I don't know why.
Well, this is a good transition to our rating system that we always do. We want to rate the movies and things we talk about 1 out of 5, consistent scale, so we can compare across all of the many things we've talked about. We've done over 50 episodes of this podcast now, but because we get super critical about the content, I like to tailor the rating system. I've crunched the numbers here, and I've decided that let's do a scale of 1 to 5 doctors in your tent. Because if you've only got one doctor, that's not really a very good greeting. You're just kind of saying doctor to yourself. But if you got 5 doctors, you can get a really good long chain, a super critical reaction chain of doctors' greetings going, which is pretty good. It's polite in addition to it being a delight. How many doctors in your tent would you give this particular movie, Gabe?
I would say 1.5. It's just, it's bad without being bad to the point where it's good, like it's just right on that cusp. If it was worse, I'd be able to watch it and just kind of ridicule it, but it's like it's just outside of that. So yeah, 1.5 for me. This is a real stinker.
Yeah, it's not, I remember this movie being a lot funnier. I give it 2 doctors in a tent. There's still some funny moments. I think that doctor joke in the tent is very funny, and it's that kind of joke that works really well because it goes on very long, but then immediately kind of following that, you get that really awkward scene with Chevy Chase harassing the doctor, and then, as you mentioned, that surgery scene just goes on for so long, and then
it doesn't land in anything funny.
Most of the training sequences don't make a lot of sense, and they're not particularly very funny. The ending is funny with the nuke stuff there, but it's just overall, I have to just give it a 2. I wish I could do more because I have, in my memory, it's a 4. So this going to a 2 is pretty sad on my part. But you know what I would recommend to people? There are YouTube videos of the missile launch and things like that. Watch that. Watch the doctor scene. You're good. But let's recommend things for people to check out instead of this movie. I've got a couple of things that I'll go to first, but maybe, Gabe, you've got some stuff. First, I recommend a book by Stephen Pomeroy called An Untaken Road, Strategy, Technology, and the Hidden History of America's Mobile ICBMs. From 2016, Gabe, you asked about why the U.S. did not build these, but the Russians did. Most of my information from this for this episode was from that book. It's pretty interesting. He's a historian who writes and teaches on this topic, and it goes not into just about road mobile systems, but also all of those, like, drop a missile, not a cruise missile, but let's drop an ICBM from the back of an airplane, and whether or not that would work. So I might lend this book to you, and you might enjoy that chapter.
All right.
I recommend the movie The Man Who Knew Too Little, which stars Bill Murray. It came out in 1997. I might have recommended this on the podcast before, but it's one of my favorite spy comedies, and it actually does hold up, and I think it's a funnier take than what this is. It basically is Bill Murray is a regular dude who goes to visit his brother in London, and his brother does not like him because he's kind of a doofus. So he sends them on like you know how you have like a murder mystery dinner where you're kind of in the middle of an action, but you're really there. You're to be pretending to be part of the plot. Well, he sends them on like an improv crew thing where he's going to be a spy, and there's going to be improv actors from a local comedy, theater comedy type thing. It ends up getting mixed into an actual spy drama, but he doesn't realize it the entire time, and he ends up getting mixed into some sort of like Russian-U.S. hijinks type thing. It's really funny, and I think it holds up quite a bit. I recommend people play the Nuclear War card game. We talked about it on our podcast. It's a game that's from the 1980s by Buffalo Games, and if you really want to settle nuclear war over a card game, don't play Trivial Pursuit or Risk Combo. Play this one. It's a lot of fun. And finally, I recommend, once COVID is over, go to the International Spy Museum in D.C. I've been to the former location, which was a lot of fun, and this new one, which I want to go to as soon as it's available and safe to do so. A huge location on the waterfront, and it looks really, really cool. Gabe, I think we should go there when it's everything's okay.
Let's do it. We gotta go there. We gotta go to the Air Force One thing. Mm-hmm. We got a list of post-COVID field trips we gotta do.
All right, so what do you recommend to people?
I think if you want a better kind of spy parody, the show Get Smart. That was kind of what I was thinking of. This might be more like, with some crazy stuff and just more silliness.
There's no gadgets in this movie. There's no gadgets.
I know. It's crazy. So yeah, if you want to, if you see this movie and then you need something to, refresh your palate, Get Smart. And actually, I was looking, there are a few episodes of Get Smart that have some nuclear related things. So maybe for a future podcast we can think about doing some of that.
Sounds like a smart plan to me. Another movie I recommend is Fletch, which stars Chevy Chase. And he's not a spy, but he's like a cop, and he has to go undercover a lot, so he has a bunch of zany characters. That movie is, that movie is very, very funny. Fletch Lives, which is the sequel, is not particularly very good, but Fletch is quite good. Well, that's it. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Gabe. Where can people find you? They can look up at the DC area and see flying around.
Yeah, just look up, see the signal, the light signal. I'm still trying to get my wife to approve a bat signal style spotlight, but it's not going that well.
Good luck. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Supercritical Podcast. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, or you want to tell us what we got wrong, either nuke-wise or maybe we're wrong about this movie and you really like it, and you're actually a spy and you think this is wholly accurate because this is how you got into the industry, and you're actually tapping my phones and you just want to talk and reach out. Well, instead of tapping our phones, you can contact us on Twitter at Nuclear Podcast. We're also on Facebook. I don't know how much longer because I hate Facebook, but we're on Facebook.com/Supercritical Podcast. And we're also on email, which is the best way to contact me, supercriticalpodcast@gmail.com. And I don't usually like to beg about this or to mention this, but it's always good every once in a while if you are on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you listen to the show, and you're able to rate it 5 stars, please do so. It's great to every once in a while see that spike of listenership, because for some reason the algorithm 5-star reviews help that out. But if you don't want to be on record about that kind of stuff, just tell a friend you have this crazy podcast, maybe they might like it. That's always great to get a recommendation from someone else. So until next time, this has been Tim Westmyer
and Gabe. And
remember, if it's pop culture and radioactive, we are bound to get super critical about it. Have a good one.